Hi everyone. So today we'll be looking at the lecture number 9, which is managing errors and exceptions, as a continuation of the module for Java programming of the course EC312 Object Oriented Programming. So before we look at how you can handle errors and exceptions, let's look at what we call as an error. So there are two types of errors. First one, which is called as a compile time error. So compile time error is the one which you will encounter frequently whenever you compile the program. You will be seeing a lot of errors, something like missing a semicolon, or you will have a variable not defined, etc. etc. So these are called as compile time errors. So these are errors which are basically syntax errors. Syntax errors in the sense like the syntax of your code is something wrong. And the Java compiler, when it compiles, it finds the errors and lists it to you. For example, if you look at this code, so there is actually a semicolon missing in the line. So there should be having a semicolon here, otherwise this will be a wrong statement. So this is a compile time error. Before running the code itself, the compiler will let you know that there is a syntax mistake, that semicolon is missing. So we can list some number of compile time errors. The most frequent one is like the semicolons will be missing. Sometimes the brackets also will be missing. For example, there will be a mismatch of brackets. Like there will be a starting bracket. The number of starting brackets should be equal to the number of closing bracket. So there will be, if they are not equal, that is called as a mismatch. So basically that occurs usually in classes or when you do methods. Or misspelling of identifiers. For example, you might have declared a variable a1 and you have everywhere you have used the variable as a. So that is misspelling of identifier. Keyword, for example, if instead of writing if, you might have write off. So that is a misspelling syntax error. Or missing double quotes in strings. So when you are doing string, so you will have double quotes before the starting of the string and double quotes at the end of the string. So whatever is written inside this is basically your complete string. So if you miss if you miss starting or even the ending double quotes, it is a compile time syntax error. Use of undeclared variables, that is another one. Incompatible types in assignments and initialization. So this usually happens mostly in Java. In other languages, it is they will not give us an error. It will usually give us a warning. So incompatible type means you might have declared a variable a which is of int, and you have declared a variable b which is of double, and when you do b or a equal to b, that is you are assigning an integer variable a value from a floating point variable. So this is called as incompatible types. So you cannot do that. Bad reference to object or use of equal to in place of double equal to operator. Basically, if you do if, etc. The next type of error is called as a runtime error. So runtime error is the one which compiler cannot catch. So when you execute the code, after execution, when you see the output, then you know that there is some problem with your code. Basically, it produces wrong results due to wrong logic or terminate due to errors in such as stack overflow. For example, there is some memory exception, etc. So that cannot be caught by the compiler. So common runtime errors are divide by 0. That's the most common runtime error, that you cannot divide a variable by 0. So you might have a statement in which a by b is assigned to c. Now when you run the program, it might be possible that the b might be taking a value equal to 0, that you might get only after execution. So this is causing a runtime error. Accessing an integer array out of bounds in an array. So this happens is you might have declared an array a which say like size of this is let's say 5, and then you're trying to access the 6th element of the array, which is not possible because your array size itself is 5. So when you try to access the 6th element, then it is out of index. So that is called as an out of index array. trying to store a value in an array of incompatible class or type. As I mentioned earlier, you might have declared an integer array when you are trying to store a double value, trying to cast an instance of class to one of its subclasses, trying to legally change the state of a thread, attempting to use native size of an array. So you can't declare an array of size -2 because the size of array should be at least integer value 1. Converting invalid string to a number. So when you can always convert string to numbers, but it should be a valid string. For example, if you declare 1 as a string, you can convert it to a number because it's a valid string, valid number. But if you declare a and you want to convert this a string to a number, it is not possible because a is an alphabet, it's not a number. Accessing a character that is out of bounds of a string. So string has a length, you're trying to access a character outside the length. So that is runtime errors. So those are all errors. Now let's look at something called as an exception. So exception is an unwanted event that interrupts the normal flow of the program, mainly caused by runtime error. So as the name suggests, it's an unwanted event. Okay, so it occurs usually during the runtime, and something which you doesn't want to occur, that is called as an unwanted events, and it will affect your program in such a way that the normal flow of the program will not be correct. So you need to find the exceptions while the code is running. So you need to write a code, or you need to have some provision in your programming language to catch the exception. So what are the steps to catch the exception? First step, always find the problem. This is called as hit the exception. Inform that an error has occurred. This is called as throw the exception. So whom to inform? The code should inform to other parts that an exception has occurred. Receive the error information, which is basically catch the exception. So once you see that a problem has occurred, then you should be able to receive that information from some other part of the code and take corrective actions. That is called as handling the exception. So basically, you want to find the problem, inform to other parts that there is something wrong happened. Other parts should receive this wrong information and they should take an action. So then what is the difference between errors and exceptions? So if you look at errors, it is impossible to recover from an error, while exceptions you can always recover. And errors are of type unchecked, while exceptions are of type checked or unchecked. So we look at what is checked and unchecked. Errors usually occur during runtime, but exception can occur during compile time or runtime. Errors are caused by application running environment. This is caused by application itself. These are common types of exceptions. So these are all keywords in Java. You can see the arithmetic exception has capital A and capital E without any space. So this is actually one type of exception in Java. So let's say when you're dividing some number by 0, it's an arithmetic exception because you can't divide a number by 0. So it is that exception will be thrown in the sense like it will be given a notice to all other parts of the program that this has occurred. Similarly, array index out of bounds exception. Again, you can't access a value of an array which is outside its limits. So if you declare an array of 7, then you should not try to access the 8th element of the array. Class not found. You're trying to access a class which is not defined. File not found. This is basically coming when you are doing file operations. IO exception, like when you are trying to enter something from the keyboard or display in the screen, there is some type of error. Interrupted exception. This is basically when a thread is waiting, sleeping or doing some processing, and it is interrupted. No such field exception. So it is thrown when a class does not contain a field specified. So let's look at the type of exceptions. So this, in the previous slide, we saw the exceptions which is defined in your programming language. You can again categorize the exceptions in two types. One is called as checked exception. So this exception occurs at the compile time and also called compiled and exceptions or checked exceptions. So when you are doing the compilation of the code, some problem occurs, some exception occurs. Now if some code within a method throws a checked exception, then the method must either handle the exception or it must specify the exception using throws keyword. So if the code throws an exception, means if the code shows okay something has happened, then that should be handled inside the code. An unchecked exception usually occurs during the runtime. It is up to programmers to specify or catch exceptions. Now for exception handling, we have some keywords that we will see in the next few slides. There is something called set try, catch, finally, throw, and throws. So we'll put something called a try block, a catch block, finally block, and there are other two, throw and throws. So how will you do exception handling? So basically the structure is like this. You have a try block. Inside the try block you will say a statement, or you will write multiple statements. Out of these multiple statements, it is possible that some of the statements might cause an exception. If the exception comes in these statements, it will be caught by the catch block. There will be a block defined using catch keyword. Inside the catch block, you will write the statement depending on the exception thrown, what should be done. So the syntax is like this. You have a try block, you write a code inside the try block, there's a catch statement, and there is an exception name that you say here, what type of exception you want to catch. Then you write the code inside the catch. So basically you have try and catch blocks. The try block contains set of statements where an exception can occur. A try block is always followed by a catch block, which handles the exception that occurs in associated try block. So there's a try block and there's a catch block at the bottom. The try block will be having some statements where there's a possibility of an exception. The catch block will have some statements in which if the specified exception has occurred, then what to do. The try block must be followed by catch blocks, or finally block, or both. So try block should be followed by a catch, or finally. A catch cannot have without a try, and try should be followed by a catch. So when a catch block is where you handle the exceptions. So once exception occurs, what should you do? That is defined in the catch block. And this block must follow a try block, and a single try block can have several catch blocks associated with it. So we will see that in as an example, and different exceptions can be caught in different catch blocks. For example, in try block you might have an arithmetic exception and array index of bound exception. So those two are two different types of exceptions. They should be caught using two different catch blocks, and when an exception occurs in a try block, the corresponding catch block that handles that particular exception executes. Let's look at an example. So this is a program in which you are trying to divide by 0. Let's see each of the things. So you have a main function or static main method. As always, there is a class, and there is a try block in which you have put some code. Now it is possible that there can be exception thrown from this code, or it might not throw an exception. In our code, in this example, we purposefully put one statement in the data is equal to 100 by 0. Basically, the code is inside the try block which can possibly throw an exception is put. And here there is a division by 0 which will throw an exception. So division by 0 is not defined. This will throw an exception. So you have defined something called as a catch block to receive that exception. And in the catch block we see that this catch block catches an arithmetic exception. So if this code would have been, you are trying to access an array of size, you are trying to access an 7th element of an array of size 5, then this catch block will not catch it because you are trying to catch only arithmetic exception. So division by 0 is an arithmetic exception, and this catch block will catch that exception. And inside the catch block, you are saying you print what is the exception. So this E will contain what type of exception it is. So basically you can see that it's an E, kind of a variable declared of, or an object declared of arithmetic exception, and it will be printed. So now question is, can I have multiple catch statements after try? It is possible. It is just like a switch case statement. So you will have a so let's say if various tasks need to be performed at the occurrence of various exceptions, multiple catch block can be used. That means in this try you will have a very large number of code, and lot of exceptions can be thrown, and then you can write a code in which you will have multiple catch statements, in which each catch statement catches any of the one particular exception and do what should be required. So you can have n number of catch statements after try. So this is an example where you are trying to access a particular element of the array and put a particular value into it. So there is basically the class main method. You have a try block, and then you have first catch, which is trying to catch an arithmetic exception. There is another catch which is trying to catch an array index out of bounds exception. There is one other catch which will catch a general exception. So if you look at this statement in the try block, a of 5, and you are declaring an array of size 5. So array of size 5 means you have a square bracket of 0, a square bracket of 1, a square bracket of 2, square bracket of 3, square bracket of 4. So that means 5 elements. So the maximum index of the array is a in square bracket 4. But here we are trying to access a square bracket 5, which is the 6th element of the array, which is not possible. So this is basically an array index out of bound exception. So this, when you execute this code, this will be caught by this catch statement, and it says task to complete, which means that it has caught the exception. Now in the right hand side of this assignment statement, you have division by 0. This division by 0 is an arithmetic exception which will be caught by the corresponding catch block. So you see that on the left hand side there is a exception which is caught by the catch block of array index out of bounds. On the right hand side there is an exception which is caught by the catch block, which is arithmetic exception. So this arithmetic exception will not catch the array index out of bounds, and this array index out of bounds exception will not catch arithmetic exception. So those two are particularly reserved for that particular their particular kind of exception. There is something called as a finally block. Now the question is, what if you want to catch any exception it is thrown, or you want to execute a code whether there is exception or not. So a finally block contains all the crucial statement that must be executed when an exception occurs or not. So there's a try block. Now the try block has code. Now it is possible that the try block will not throw any exception. That is fine. If it throws, there are catch blocks which can execute. If it doesn't throw, the catch blocks will not catch it, but still it will execute the finally block. So finally block will execute irrespective of whether there is some code which throws or doesn't throw an exception. So statement present this block will always execute regardless an exception occurs in the try block or not, such as closing a connection stream, etc. It is used to handle an exception that is not caught by any of the previous catch statement. So for example, you might have written many catch statement, but this try block throws an exception which is not present for any of this catch. So if that occurs, then it will execute the finally statement, finally block. So there is an example here. If you look at this example, I have again a class, there is a main method, there is a try statement. Now this try statement inside whatever code I have written will not generate an exception because the code is correct. You are just dividing 55 by 5. So none of the catch statement will be executed. So it will, but once you finish this, so when you say 55 by 5, it will execute the finally block is executed in this finally statement. So the catch will not be executed because the code is correct. Once you finish the try execution, it will directly jump to finally and it will execute the code. So these are all exceptions that is defined in your Java program. Now can you throw in your own exception? So that is done using the throw keyword. So the throw statement is used along with the exception type, like arithmetic exception, array index out of bound exception, security exception, etc. Syntax is throw new a throwable subclass. So arithmetic exception is a throwable subclass. You create a new exception of that. We'll see an example. So this is an example in which if the age is less than 18, then you say it is a below required age exception. And if it is more than 18, then you say you are old enough. So the question is, the if condition is if age is less than 18. So here in the main function you have called check age function with the value 15. So the age will have now the value 15. You are checking if 15 is less than 18. That is correct. 15 is less than 18. So it will throw this exception saying that below required age. So this occurs during the runtime. So you can, when you execute this code, it can be seen that this exception is thrown. So this is how we can. So this is like custom made exception. That when you run the program, you will say exception in thread main java.arithmetic below required age. So whatever message is inside this will be printed here, and it will also show at from which line number it has got this exception. So basically it says sample check age dot java at line number 4, which is this one, and this function is called from line number 11, which is java 11. So these are the exceptions and error handling in Java. So you can look at the following questions and try to answer them. Thank you.